Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at remarks made from Ankara, somewhat contradictory because there was a strong hint, and it was picked up fast by the Turkish press this Tuesday, that they were seriously considering at the highest level a buffer zone inside of Syria, more, it seems, according to our panel, to take on the Kurds than to take on ISIS. But we've heard this Tuesday some backtracking, saying no, we're not going to war. So a bit of posturing, it seems, on several parts. Already last week, by the way, there was fiery rhetoric after recent surprise gains by Kurdish forces against two key towns on the road to ISIS's stronghold of Raqqa. There was a sudden counterattack by jihadists against the border town of Kobani, which in Arabic, and Kobani on the map is further to the west of Tal Abyad, which in Arabic, Kobani is called Ain al-Arab. Now that prompted accusations ISIS was allowed to transit through Turkey. Taking offense to it was the Turkish president.
We strongly condemn the attack that targeted innocent civilians in Ain al-Arab. All Syrian citizens who were wounded were brought to our country, and around 130 of those injured are being treated in our hospitals. I deplore affiliates of the terrorist PKK group for their smear campaign in the aftermath of this heinous attack. You can't govern with just words. You have to act. No one has the right to align Turkey with terrorism. Those who have become instruments for the international lobbies that are Turkey's enemies and for Bashar al-Assad, they should question themselves.
All right, so the president there talking about a smear campaign when it came to accusations that ISIS had been allowed to transit through Turkey. He insists, the Turkish president, that it was indeed through Syria that those fighters went. We're talking about it with our panel from Brussels. Adam Uzun, member of the Kurdish National Congress from Geneva. We are in the company of Aaron Stein, author of Turkey's New Foreign Policy. Here in the studio, William Jordan, of the former U.S. State Department official, and our correspondent in Ankara, Jasper Mortimer. Jasper, did we get to the bottom of how that counterattack in Kobani happened?
No, we haven't. But, you know, Francois, I think if ISIS forces had traveled through Turkey, knowing the people in that border region, there are a lot of Kurds there. They vote for Kurdish parties. They're not supporters of the government. If they had evidence of ISIS transiting Turkey, such as photographs, those photographs would have leaked and would have been published by now.
All right. Let me before I get Adam. I want to ask Adam Uzun about that. Adam, your thoughts on how the fighting is going right now and these accusations.
You know, we have evidences that the Turkish border is using all the time by ISIS to intervene in Kobani, to intervene in other areas where the Kurds live in Syria. And for Turkey...
but you just heard our correspondent, Jasper Mortimer, say that if there had been photographic evidence, it would have popped up in the Turkish press.
You know, by the latest attack in Kobani, the Kurdish forces have captured 3 ISIS members, and those 3 ISIS members declared that they got support Turkey. And the Turkish president is saying always ISIS and PYD, so that means the Kurds in Syria are the same, are the same enemy. Bashar Assad is enemy, ISIS enemy is enemy, Kurds are enemy, everybody is enemy to Turkey. Why? How can does it work? So that means the policy on Turkey on Syria is a false policy, is in a policy on fear, is in a policy on not accepting any Kurdish status. So therefore, they are trying to do everything to give every support to prevent any status in Kurdish. So today is the attack was on Kobani. I'm expecting an attack in Tel Abyad. I'm expecting an attack in Afrin Canton, supported by the Turkish intelligence services too. So therefore, this policy has to change. And the border, Syrian border to Turkey is not a Turkish border, it's a NATO border. If Turkey say, I want to have a buffer zone in Syria, why they are not asking UN to do that? If UN do such thing, the Kurds will be happy with it. But if Turkey send their troops and to intervene or to occupy Syrian Kurdish area, the Kurds will never accept it.
All right, reactions coming in. One saying Erdogan never fought ISIS. He just wants to take revenge. Revenge, I suppose that user on Twitter means revenge against Assad or the Kurds. But let me ask you, Aaron Stein, you just heard Adem Uzun saying that there is the complicit support of Turkish intelligence for ISIS. Is Erdogan turned a blind eye to the jihadists, or is he actively supporting them?
Well, look, it's far more complicated than that. Certainly there was a policy for a couple of years, starting in 2011 and I would say up until 2014, where the border was left open. There's no denying that the border was relatively easy to pass across, and much of the foreign fighting force that is now fighting for ISIS did pass through the Turkish border. There has been a recognition of the ISIS threat in the Turkish state, and there has been efforts to clamp down on the border security. And that was really beginning about a year ago, but really ramping up again about 8 months previously. The question about this attack in Kobani, though, raises a larger issue. I mean, the concerns that were laid out, I mean, by the Kurdish guests is very much the sense. So whether or not it's true or not, most Kurds within Turkey, most Kurds within the city of Kobani, and most Kurds within the region just accept the idea that Ankara is supporting ISIS, which is very damaging to Turkish-Kurdish relations. And I think while you're starting to see a big pushback from the Turkish government, because these allegations from the Kurdish side are starting to gain more traction in the international media and making Ankara very uncomfortable.
But Aaron, we've been hearing about this pushback for a while. As William Jordan mentioned in part one of our discussion, we're still waiting for the green light for Turkey, a NATO member, to give access to that strategic airbase, which is just close to the border.
Yeah, look, Turkey's policy on the Syrian conflict is far different than the United States'. Ankara believes that ISIS is an outgrowth of Bashar al-Assad's brutality. So you can't deal with ISIS until you deal with Bashar al-Assad. And it's one piece of leverage with the United States is the airbase. And so they're trying to use it in order to force a change in U.S. policy to not just attack ISIS, but also to attack the regime. And one of the arguments that they've consistently been making is that by degrading ISIS in certain areas, you're actually empowering other groups, other terrorist groups, like what they call the Syrian Kurds, the PYD, to then take territory. And so for them, you see a problem coming with a narrow focus on ISIS because it does not serve Turkish interests. This doesn't mean that they support ISIS, but rather they think that the policy meant to defeat and degrade ISIS is out of kilter, and that we need to focus on the regime first, ISIS second, and then deal with the Kurds probably third.
Again, before there was an ISIS strategist in Washington had thought about a buffer zone to take on Assad. Many in the Syrian opposition had long hoped Turkey would be the one to take that initiative. That was then, and this is now.
It's voiced our concerns about the logistics, the challenges inherent in creating any kind of buffer zone. Our position remains that it's a complex issue and something that we would have concerns about undertaking ourselves, but let's let the Turkish government make a decision.
All right, so the U.S. State Department voicing concerns about the logistics and challenges inherent in a buffer zone there. Relations have waxed and waned between Turkey and the United States over the past 4 years. How are they doing right now?
Well, I think the whole Syria situation and the whole complication that I mentioned over Incirlik with respect to how to fight best against the Islamic State had put a tremendous strain on the relationship. But let's, I would add to what Aaron Stein said in pointing out that all of this trouble between the Washington and Ankara over Kurds has intervened to some degree or another over the past 20, 25 years. I mean, you could even go back to the first war against Iraq in 1991. The Turks were never happy with Operation Provide Comfort, which was a buffer zone in Iraq. Which was a buffer zone in Iraq. Turkey had always, with Saddam Hussein, as well as to some lesser degree with Hafez al-Assad, pursued a policy of being able to cross the border and strike against PKK targets if and as Ankara deemed necessary. In 2003, the United States was unable to enact sort of the northern part of its invasion of Iraq because the Turks, almost at the 11th hour, refused to allow the United States to base a key brigade in and around Incirlik that would have been airlifted in and moved into northern Iraq and would have significantly accelerated the invasion.
But you didn't have an ISIS then?
No, but you had the Kurds and you had Ankara's strong...
You didn't have an ISIS, and now you've got a peace process going on between the Turkish government and the imprisoned leader of the PKK.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think Washington has been puzzled as to why this sort of negotiation going on with Öcalan hasn't somehow provided the sort of breakthrough. I mean, I think the United States has naively believed, perhaps, that this is sort of the IRA moment, that the British had when they decided that it was better to negotiate an end to the troubles in Northern Ireland. They wondered why Erdogan hasn't basically pushed more aggressively to do the same thing. I can't speak to all of that. I think others are more savvy on the Turkish internal political scene. Right now, I think it's all coming to a head because of the difficulties following the contested election, which has forced the Turkish government to be some kind of a coalition. Nobody knows what shape it's going to take, and this has made everything much more complex. Washington, I think, is alternately scratching its head and tearing its hair out, trying to figure out exactly where Turkey is. In the meantime, there's this effort or this talk about a possible southern buffer zone being created by the Jordanians in order to alleviate the humanitarian crisis that Jordan faces from Syria.
And as Adam Uzen said, is this something that should go through the United Nations?
Well, and then that's been a very pregnant question with respect to what Jordan has supposedly been considering. I think that for any significant carving out of Syrian territory as buffers, you would want to pass through the UN Security Council at some point. I mean, even the military operations against Islamic State have to some degree or another been run through the Security Council as a formality. Turkey will obviously, if it decides, act unilaterally. I don't see the Jordanians doing it, but I think the Americans want the two sides of this to be somewhat in coordination and for everybody to be on firm legal and other grounds before taking any action.
All right, a reaction on Facebook from Daniel. Someone has to do something. Someone is doing something, though, Jasper Mortimer, because we have seen with the last couple of weeks that the Kurds have made significant gains in those border towns and have taken over a town that was a key route out of ISIS-held territory. There is a feeling with the backing of that U.S. air power that there is a state of flux that we weren't seeing before.
Well, certainly the Kurdish forces plus the U.S. Air Force have proved to be a winning combination. But it's doubtful that they can go too far. The ISIS attack on Kobani on the past weekend, the ISIS attack at Hasakeh, the Kurdish heartland in the northeast, these shows that the Kurdish forces might be at their limit now. They might be getting overstretched. And the Kurds have said, look, we're not going to overthrow President Bashar Assad. You know, if the West wants to use the Kurds as its proxy forces in Syria, they will not be enough. They will have to enlist or retrain the Free Syrian Army, get other groups involved in the war against ISIS and the war against Bashar al-Assad.
Adam Uzun, what are you expecting from the United States at this point?
First of all, I have to say the Kurds, they will defend themselves against ISIS whenever it is. And they will defend their territory, and they will defend the common law in the Kurdish areas with the Arabs and with all the other religious and ethnic groups. And the threat of ISIS will be defeated in the Kurdish areas. Kurds will fight against ISIS, first of all. Secondly, ISIS is enemy not just of the Kurds. ISIS is enemy of the humanity. ISIS is enemy of the international coalition, of the US too. So therefore, I think the collaboration on the ground with the international coalition should be continued, should be strong, should be more powerful than it is. Secondly, I don't think so that the Kurds are trying to attack other areas to be in offensive. They are in defensive. If somebody attacks them, they will defend themselves. They declared that on the beginning. When the Syrian revolution started, the Kurds said, okay, if the coalition accepts the Kurdish rights, we will be with the coalition. But the coalition never accept the Kurdish rights. So therefore the Kurds say, okay, we will have our own way, and our own way is not just based on the military. It will be.
Let me ask you about that, Adam, because we have seen the head of the PYD insist that there is no intent to form an independent Kurdistan inside of Syria. However, what happens if Bashar al-Assad falls?
You know, the best solution for Syria is a democratic Syria. So with the Kurds, with the Arabs, with the Turkmens, with the Armenians, with all the Christians living in, should live together. I think the best solution and the best system should be replaced when Bashar al-Assad falls, should be a democratic Syria. And the Kurds, they have proposed and project how to democratize Syria. How to democratize Syria is based on common fight and common struggle with the Arabs and with the other minorities and religion groups in there. The Kurds are now seeking to gain it.
Aaron Stein, is the situation evolving faster or slower than we think right now inside of Syria?
Well, they're certainly evolving faster than we had thought. I mean, the table has changed, and in the last week has really resulted in massive gains for the Kurdish forces. But one thing I would add is one thing that the Kurds really want is representation. I don't think we should overestimate the extent to which that they're cooperating with Washington. It's indirect. There's nothing level on the diplomatic level, and Kurds are looking for that recognition. They are, at least in the eastern part of Syria and stretching into Iraq, on the front lines. And they are proving their battle worthiness in multiple places. Where it gets a little problematic is that they are rejected. I mean, their demands are rejected by the national coalition that was put out. They have a hostile neighbor in Turkey and problematic relations with other elements of the opposition. And so you have a problem moving forward that will require the United States, really, in my opinion, who is giving indirect air support, to really engage and say, what does it actually want from this? Are we going to bring the Kurds somehow into their vision of a democratic, autonomous Syria, similar to where I'm living, Geneva, right now, in terms of democratic style and governance, really devolving of power to local cantons with central democratic authority, or at least central authority in Kamishli? Or, are we going to continue to push to integrate them with the Syrian National Coalition? That is a decision Washington has to make, and I don't think it's actually made it yet.
And to the point that Jasper Mortimer made, that the Kurds won't venture outside of their own areas.
Well, I mean, look, the Kurds are going to continue to push south, but I would say into the outskirts of Raqqa, but I would say that they're not going to march on the city.
So who's going to do it?
It is an Arab... Well, that's an open question. It's an Arab majority city, and the Kurds are very open in saying that they would have to partner with Arab tribes in the region, in that area, to march on the city, backed by U.S. air power. I would say actually the main focus of the Kurds will actually be pushing west in trying to move across the Euphrates River and unite what is the non-contiguous canton of Afrin with the now contiguous cantons of Kobani
and that's what Recep Tayyip Erdogan fears
because
the
not
most.
only is the Islamic State standing in their way, so is another umbrella of rebel coalition standing in their way, Jaish al-Fatah, which has a very close relationship with the Turkish government.
But that's what President Erdogan seems to fear, that this uniting of the Syrian and Turkish Kurdish forces.
Yes, he does.
Jasper Mortimer.
Yes, he does, certainly. I think all the recent talk about Turkey intervening in Syria is driven by the Kurds' success over there. Now,
if somebody can hear me, I lost audio.
Go ahead, Jasper.
I don't think Turkey is going to intervene in Syria. The Turkish people are very much opposed to their country getting involved in the Syrian swamp. You know, in 2013, 2 separate bomb blasts occurred along the border inside Turkey, and they killed a total of, I think it was 66 people. And if Turkey goes into Syria now, there will be more of that. Secondly, the current government is a lame duck. It has had no majority in parliament since June the 7th. Today, it couldn't even get its candidate elected as the speaker of the new parliament. Parliament did authorize the government to go into Syria, but that was when, the government held a majority. Today, it is a caretaker government. The prime minister has technically resigned. And it's constitutionally uncertain whether he has the authority to order the Turkish armed forces into Syria. I think Turkey will only enter Syria if ISIS attacks Turkey, and I don't think ISIS would do that. A third point is, Turkey has long called for the US to support it in creating a buffer zone in northern Syria so that it could relocate the Syrian refugees in Turkey, who now number 2 million, and allow them to live there under protection. But for that, it would need US air support. You were talking about the US Incirlik air base in southeastern Turkey. Turkey has basically said to America, we'll let you use that air base if you support us in creating a buffer zone in northern Syria. Now, the US has refused that. So for Turkey to go in and create a buffer zone all by itself alone, I think would be very dangerous.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Jasper Mortimer in Ankara. I want to thank Aaron Stein in Geneva, Adam Uzun in Brussels. William Jordan, thank you for being with us. Time now for our Media Watch segment. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. It's all Greece in terms of buzz and online coverage this evening. But just a little transition from your debate topic, there has been some reaction coming from Ankara as well to the woes of their Greek neighbours. We are ready to help Greece survive its economic crisis with cooperation in tourism, energy and trade, said the Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. So I'm not sure if it's exactly the support that Greece is looking for this evening, but certainly...
So the Turks supporting the Greeks.
The Turks supporting the Greeks. You also have Moscow very keenly observing what's happening from the sidelines, as Slate is pointing out in an article by Joshua Keating. Indeed, Alexei Tsipras was at an economic forum in St. Petersburg just last month, so perhaps
Which
Athens...
infuriated negotiators in Brussels.
Indeed, so I suppose options are being looked at. Just to take a look at how the European newspapers are covering matters today. Die Welt in Germany. Europe holds the door open for Greece, saying that the merciful Chancellor Angela Merkel and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker would be willing to negotiate if the Greeks vote yes in the referendum on whether to accept creditors' bailout proposals. Meanwhile, Le Monde, speaking about the predicament for François Hollande, who as a socialist president with quite a lot of rebel members in his parliament, and also the far left in France putting pressure on the president to be somewhat sympathetic to this far left government in Greece. But he is he is also trying to, I suppose, walk a tightrope in terms of keeping on the same line as Germany. So this is a particularly difficult one for François Hollande, and that's a photo of creditor or of people outside of ATM machines in Greece, where there's a €60 limit at the moment for people withdrawing money. Meanwhile, in Spain, El País points out that this is really an in-out referendum as regards the European Union. A no vote in this referendum in Greece would be a no to Europe, and that is what European leaders are saying, united against the Greek Prime Minister Tsipras, according to El País. Interesting to look at another, well, it's not a Spanish broadsheet, but that is the leader of Podemos in Spain alongside Tsipras. And he's this article is looking at all of the left-wing or far-left alliances around Europe that are in support of Tsipras. So it is quite a complex picture. I'll just finish with one element, Francois. This is a crowdfunding effort that has been launched by a British man to try to raise the rather massive 1.6 billion.
They've raised 526. I see on that.
A valiant effort, but I'm not sure if it's a solution.
Every little bit helps.
Indeed.
All right, James Creedon, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.